When you share a little bit of yourself, you'll find good feelings growing. You get a glow that feels so warm inside. You share yourself and your heart opens wide. When you share a little bit of yourself, you'll find good feelings growing.
From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
This is 5 TV.
They are beating the passengers. They are beating the passengers. They are threatening to kill them now. They are threatening to kill them now. We want the fuel now.
Yeah, we've just had the sad duty of informing the Steedham family that we've had confirmation that their son, Petty Officer Second Class Robert Steedham, has been confirmed as being killed by the terrorists on the TWA hijacking.
This was one of the most despicable acts of terrorism ever to be directed at American citizens abroad. This person is responsible in part for that. We really want him back.
And now we may get him. Good evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. The charge is air piracy and murder, and one of the accused could become the first Middle East terrorist ever extradited to the United States to face trial. Tonight, we'll focus on what that could mean, because if we get him, we may wish we hadn't. Among our guests, former Secretary of State Alexander Haig.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
Repeatedly over the last few years, Washington has watched in frustration as one European government after another has captured, briefly held, and then released a succession of suspected and, in some cases, known terrorists. In some cases, the Europeans have feared economic reprisal from a Libya or an Iran. But sometimes it has been the simple reality that imprisoning terrorists is dangerous business. While we have had some incidents of domestic terrorism here in the United States, it seems that for the first time our government may be about to get custody of a suspected Middle Eastern terrorist who is believed to have targeted American civilians 2 summers ago. As Nightline correspondent Marshall Frady reports, when our allies have made such arrests in the past, it often set into motion a long and deadly sequence of counteractions.
We must land at Beirut. We must land at Beirut. No alternative.
For those days in the summer of 1985, we watched Americans go through the anguish of the TWA hijacking in the distant heats of the Middle East.
Captain, many people in America are calling for some kind of rescue operation or some kind of retaliation. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think that we'd all be dead men if they did, because we're continually surrounded by many, many guards.
Americans helpless in the hands of radical Islamic terrorists, brutalized, one shot point blank, killed. A 23-year-old Navy diver, Robert Steedham.
We will not forget what was done to him. There will be no forgetting. His murderers must be brought to justice.
The plane first went from Athens towards Rome, where it was hijacked.
Yet we watched all this ourselves, it seemed, almost as powerless as those within that plane, in a kind of fury of impotence, yearning to get their captors into our hands to face justice, an eagerness close at times to a lust for retribution.
Terrorists, be on notice. We will fight back against you in Lebanon and elsewhere. We will fight back against your cowardly attacks on American citizens and property.
And just 4 days ago, a man identified as one of those hijackers, Mohammad Hamadei, was arrested in Frankfurt. Washington quickly asked his extradition here, and West Germany has indicated they will speedily comply, provided, as stipulated by the extradition treaty between us, Hamadei not face a death sentence if convicted.
I don't think there's any possible way that we can have our cake and eat it. We cannot impose the death penalty and at the same time require under our treaty that West Germany extradite this person to stand trial here. We just can't have it both ways.
But U.S. officials reportedly want Hamadei badly enough to work out a deal to bring him here for a trial.
This has all of the aspects of a media spectacle. It is counterterrorism theater. It is what happens to you if you commit terrorist acts against the U.S. And you kidnap, hold hostage, take hostage Americans abroad.
But along with getting Mr. Hamadei, what else might we be getting? What's happened abroad when terrorists are caught and imprisoned offers one vision of what could await us. Paris, last September, a siege of bombings after France arrested a Lebanese terrorist. Rome, 1978, former Italian Premier Aldo Moro is abducted, finally slain by Red Brigade terrorists when the government refuses to release 13 other captured terrorists. Kuwait, December 1983, the U.S. Embassy is bombed by Shiite fundamentalists. 17 of them are caught imprisoned. December 1984, a Kuwaiti airliner is hijacked to Iran in a demand for the release of the 17. 2 Americans are killed. Beirut, February 1984. Americans began to be taken hostage, also in demand for the release of the 17. And it was a desperation to get our hostages released that led the Reagan administration eventually into the imbroglio of the Iran arms deal. All of this tracing back, of course, to one of the most spectacular examples of how what we do here can set off traumatic combustions abroad. In 1979, Iranian students seized the U.S. Embassy only 2 weeks after the deposed Shah is admitted into this country for cancer treatments. In fact, the TWA hijacking, for which we now want Hamadei extradited here to stand trial, was itself meant to force the release of Shiite prisoners in Israel and 2 Shiites held in Spain for shooting a Libyan diplomat.
I expect that there will be bombings, probably abroad. I doubt in the United States. There will be attacks against Americans. We're going to have to guard ever more against that possibility. But all of this notwithstanding, no matter how many of the negative features there are, damn it, we've got to do this. We've got to take one of these asses and put them in jail.
And there can be little doubt of the temptation to an administration beleaguered by the Iran-Contra affair of possibly diverting the public eye fixed on that political travail by getting Hamadei here to be prosecuted with a righteous gusto.
This was one of the most despicable acts of terrorism ever to be directed at American citizens abroad. This person is responsible in part for that. We really want him back.
But should bringing Hamadei here move us fully into that savage theater of revenge and counter-revenge abroad, into terrorism's dark romance of death, is that price worth it? To former hostage Bob Brown, it is.
Unfortunately, I'm very vindictive, you know, and I'd like to see him taken care of in the same way that Robert Stefano was taken care of.
If we go ahead and strike them hard and show them that we won't take the things they do, the terrible things they do, that we have pride, then I think there can be an end.
For the time being, though, Mohammad Hamadei could hold dizzily more than an American airliner hostage. If he is imprisoned here for that crime, a chain reaction of retaliation could wind up holding the American government hostage. Revenge, it's said, is a dish best enjoyed cold. This one we could find very cold and bitter indeed. Marshall Frady for Nightline in Washington.
Later in this program, we'll go live to Rome to talk with Professor Stefano Silvestri, a top security consultant to the Italian government, about what to do when confronted directly by terrorist kidnappings and threats. But first, when we come back, should we think twice about bringing a terrorist here for trial? We'll talk with former Secretary of State Alexander Haig.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Ace Hardware.
Ace is the place you come to for quality and more, and prices that are known across the land. Ace is the place.
The place for Ace Best Buys, like a swing arm lamp for $5.99.
Ace is the place.
GE 2-pack frosted bulbs for 19 cents after rebate, and Ace automatic nightlight for $2.99 a pair.
Ace is the place with the help of Hardware Land.
I was totally out of control, and I didn't even realize it. That's what's crazy about cocaine. And all along, I lied to myself because I was ashamed. Anyone who tells you cocaine's not addictive, they lie. One night, my heart freaked out. I thought thought I was going to die. I risked my health, jail, and the people who loved me. I knew I had to stop.
Call 1-800-662-HELP.
On the next Star Search, the competition gets hotter as six-time champ Tina Littlewood faces a beautiful challenger. Three-time champ Mark McCullum tackles a funny challenger. Four-time champs Hines and Keisha meet a little challenger. And four-time dance champions, the Rhythm Kings, flip over a new challenger. Watch the new stars of 87 shine.
Star Search, Saturday evenings at 6 on your TV station, 5TV.
If it's been a while since you visited the Des Moines Arts Center, boy, are you missing out. Take it seriously or take it for fun, but take in the Des Moines Arts Center.
Sunday on Business World, the rise of women on Wall Street and pensions, a program that guarantees them may be in trouble. Watch Business World Sunday.
Joining us now in our New York studios is former Secretary of State Alexander Haig. Mr. Secretary, tough dilemma. On the one hand, the United States cannot be seen to shrink from the exercise of justice against someone who has killed one of our citizens or who is charged with killing one of our citizens, hijacking a plane full of American citizens. On the other hand, you better than anyone know what can flow out of something like this. What would you do if you were back in office?
Well, Ted, I think there's several things that have to be done before a decision is made. The first is, of course, to have a very careful analysis made of the evidentiary material available in West Germany. To be sure that first there is an indictable crime and the likelihood of conviction is reasonable.
Well, there were closed indictments that the Justice Department opened, and this is one of the men they were looking for.
Well, of course, but we have to examine the evidence at hand, and that can be done very rapidly and is probably underway, although I've been told that there's no official dialogue between the United States government and Bonn on the extradition issue. But once, assuming that the evidence is reasonable, then it would seem that we have to be advocates of rule of law, not vindictive or emotional about it, but clear-headed, cold, calculated decision that the United States has an obligation to ensure that the rights of its citizens, and here the ultimate right has been abused with murder, that those criminals are brought to justice here in the United States, and I think we must proceed with extradition.
Mr. Secretary, I don't think anyone can argue with that, nor do I think anybody would. But what I want to do, or have you do for me, if you will, is analyze the consequences. Again, we have seen over the past few months what this government has been driven to because 4 or 5 Americans are held hostage as a consequence of other acts like this in Lebanon. It seems almost inevitable that if we here in the United States hold this man, try this man, jail this man, possibly even someday execute this man, that there will be reprisals. The question I have for you is what the political stomach in this country is for what follows.
Well, it's not a question of political stomach, Ted. It's a question of, very likely, the terrorism against the United States will continue. And the best way to prevent it is to bring criminals to justice and to try them and give them their just deserts. If we were to shy away because of concerns about retaliation, we are only going to feed the phenomenon of terrorism and be plagued all the more by it.
Let me turn that around. The phenomenon of terrorism, it seems, has been fed by the application of justice. There are 17 of these terrorists in a Kuwaiti jail, and their jailing has in turn fueled, as we have seen, a number of terrible terrorist incidents in an effort to get them out again.
Dad, I'm afraid you have that cart a little bit ahead of the horse. It was the terrorist acts in the first instance that caused the incarceration of the terrorists.
Oh, I've got no trouble with that. Please understand me, and you know.
I think I do.
Yeah, I'm not suggesting that their being jailed in Kuwait is a bad idea, or that this man being jailed in this country, if he's guilty, is a bad idea. But but I do have certain questions about the capacity of the American body politic to handle the consequences of something like this. We don't seem to have done too well with it. We were paralyzed in 1979 and for much of 1980 because of the consequences of permitting the Shah in here and what flowed out of that, namely the holding of the 52 Americans hostage in Tehran. We want to go through that kind of thing again?
If necessary, we're going to have to. At some point, we're going to have to take on this terrorism head on. And where we have achieved the goal of capturing a known terrorist and assuming the evidence supports the act, I think we must exercise our extradition rights. Now, you know, early on in the administration, we had a reverse case of this, where we were holding a Palestinian terrorist who had committed crimes in Israel, and it was a very, very heated and controversial case, and the United States did extradite that man to Israel, as we should have, for trial.
And I believe we're also holding an IRA man here whom the British want back and whom we have not extradited for trial.
Well, if we are, I'm confident we have got to take a very close look at that and be sure that we have or have not the obligations and that the evidence supports the right rule of law.
All right, we're going to be joined by another guest in a moment. When we come back, though, I want to talk with him and with you about what Jesse Jackson once described as breaking the cycle of violence, and I wonder if there's any creative way that you have thought of doing that. When we return, what is it like when terrorism really hits home? We'll go live to Rome to talk with Professor Stefano Silvestri, security affairs and policy consultant to the Italian government.
It's your money, son, but if you want my advice, buy another Subaru.
Sure, Dad.
I thought we agreed you'd buy a Subaru.
But, Dad, I did.
See your participating Subaru dealer January 12th through 23rd, and you could win your own Subaru XT.
The latest Hoover innovations make cleaning easier. Decade 80 with Power Surge gives extra power for stubborn dirt. Our brushback has an agitator, great for stairs and upholstery. Innovation, another reason America trusts Hoover.
Here's the smorgasburger! First we chop the cheese and chicken. Next we grind the beef and liver. Then we mix it all together. Now you got the smorgasburger.
Smorgasburger from Kettle Ration. It's like a smorgasbord in a bowl.
Sofas, love seats, fit groups, sectionals. Homemakers East and Homemakers West are jammed with furniture items that we overbought. The prices are slashed. They must be sold. Every sofa sleeper on sale. Styles, colors, so many to choose from. Buy now. There's no payments, no interest till April 87. Fantastic bargains on recliners, Action and Lazy Boy priced way down. Tremendous buys on Sealy mattress and box springs, including Sealy Posturepedic. Homemakers East on Hubble, Homemakers West on Douglas, Iowa's largest furniture stores.
Only one man can generate this kind of excitement on the basketball court. He's Iowa State coach Johnny Orr, the driving force that has led his Raging Cyclone basketball teams into the ranks of national recognition. Now each week, Coach Orr will be reviewing last week's games, discussing strategy for upcoming opponents, and recognizing his players and coaches right in your living room. When you join host Mark Matthew and Coach Johnny Orr on The Johnny Orr Show. You can join Johnny Saturday mornings at 11:30 on 5 TV. Last year was a record-setting year for Iowa State Cyclone basketball, ending with a finish amongst the Sweet 16 in the NCAA tournament. This year promises to be even better, and we got you the best seats in the house, so you can watch the most exciting basketball team on any court face some of the stiffest competition in the nation. Iowa State basketball is coming your way on the Cyclone Television Network. The Iowa State Cyclones take on the Cornhuskers of Nebraska this Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock.
Saturday is something new for the whole family. The Health Show with Kathleen Sullivan. Tomorrow, learn about new drugs being tested for AIDS and the possibility of a vaccine. The Health Show premieres Saturday at 12:30, 11:30 Central and Pacific on most of these stations.
Joining us live now in our Rome Bureau is Professor Stefano Silvestri, head of the Italian Institute of International Affairs and a consultant on terrorism and security affairs to the Italian government. What counsel would you have at this time to the American government, Professor, as it begins to deal for the first time now with what may well end up being kind of a show trial here?
Well, I would say not to dramatize too much the issue. It's simply a question of putting a man to trial for a crime. I would try not to politicize it. Of course, the terrorists might want to politicize it, but I think that the idea is that the normal rule of law should take place.
And what happens when, as has frequently occurred in Europe, the consequence of a trial like this is more violence directly related to efforts to release the person on trial? How does the government respond best?
Well, that's difficult to say. I think there are different strategies according to the different situations. From one point, if you have real proof that the person has effectively committed a crime, I think it's very difficult to have any other policy than simply put him to jail and let his time expire. If, on the contrary, there are more doubtful situations, as many times there are, then I would not completely rule out also negotiations. After all, international terrorism is a different thing from national terrorism, from internal terrorism. National terrorism has a problem of legitimacy. They want to be legitimized as interlocutors. International terrorists are already backed by states and governments many times, and so the problem of legitimization has a different meaning. So sometimes I would not even rule out negotiations, as many times has happened in Europe.
Can you imagine, Secretary Haig, what would happen if we bring this fellow over here and he is put on trial and then has to be released again? Is that what you were referring to before when you suggested we've got to be very, very careful that we have all the goods on him?
Yes, indeed, that's part of it. But I think also that if we convict him, because the evidence, as we assess it, is there reasonably, and then the terrorists want to negotiate, perhaps even to release the American hostages they still have, then that would complicate the question and would require a whole new set of judgments. But I think as a rule, when we pay blackmail, or when we're intimidated for fear of what the terrorists might do in counteraction, we are already paralyzed and we've already played the game the way the terrorists want it played, and we just have to avoid that.
Well, let me pick up on that very interesting thought that you just expressed. You're suggesting that it might be possible that if this fellow comes over, he's convicted, he's put into jail, that the U.S. government might do a swap?
It's not inconceivable.
It is to me. I mean, let me explain to you why I think it's inconceivable, because then what you're doing is providing incentives then for every terrorist group in the world to pick up kind of spare Americans to keep them in reserve in the unlikely event that one of their other colleagues will be picked up.
No, Ted, I don't disagree with that broad assertion. I'm not one that thinks it's ever wise to say never, however. And one would have to make a very careful calculation in this instance. It would depend on a number of things that are as yet unponderable, but it's not as though we hadn't done it in the past. I think we've had some very recent cases. The government of Israel has done it. We in the United States have done it in the case of the Soviet spy and Mr. Danilov. So these are not unbelievable things.
President Reagan, as you know, would take some issue with you over that, but I think logic is on your side, despite what the president has said publicly. Professor Silvestri, what do you think about this idea of trial, imprisonment, and then the possibility of a swap?
Well, it has been already done, as was said. Of course, I mean, the difference is that now you have no cards in your hand. When you have someone in jail, you would have a card in your hand, so you can play it. That's the difference.
What about the political pressures, for example, in Italy? What was the public pressure when there are all these instances then of violence, when Aldo Moro was killed, for example? Is there not then tremendous pressure just to give in to the terrorists, ship them out of the country, get rid of them?
Yeah, but that's why I was making a difference between internal terrorism and international terrorism. Because if we had accepted the conditions of the terrorists at the time, we would have legitimized them as a kind of legitimized political party in Italy. We would have legitimized terrorism in Italy, inside Italy, while we could have defeated him. So, well, we prefer to have the risk of having Moro killed than the risk of legitimizing the terrorists. But with international terrorism, the situation is quite different, because you cannot be sure that not discussing, not simply with them, but with other states, with other governments, you are not simply creating more victims without any real result.
Secretary,
so the difference,
I'm sorry, let me just jump to Secretary Haig for a moment. I suggested to you before that I'd be interested in hearing whether you have any ideas for breaking this cycle of violence, short of this kind of tough, rigid position on both sides, that of the terrorists, you take one of our people, we'll take 10 of yours in order to get our person back, and the very justifiable position that you have struck that we cannot let this kind of thing go unpunished. Any alternative?
There is no alternative than the application firmly and courageously of rule of law. And when one violates rule of law, one must be subject to sanction of law. And terrorism is no different than kidnapping here at home or crimes on our street. I think my colleague in Italy has quite rightly pointed out that frequently there are differences between internal acts of law-breaking and external ones, which involve international affairs. And I don't want to, by speculating that perhaps we might want to trade at a later date this fellow for our American hostages, that I would be in favor in general of such a thing. I think it's generally a mistake. But to say never is always a mistake. We've learned that recently.
All right, Secretary Haig, Professor Silvestri, I thank you both very much. I'm afraid we're out of time, but I will be back with more in just a moment.
You know, everyone's pretending to be a banker these days. But you won't find a banker in there. No banker in there either. No way. The place you're sure to find a banker is at a full-service bank.
The place you can count on for safety, convenience, and working with professionals who have the know-how, training, and continuing education it takes to handle all of your financial needs. After all,
A banker is what makes your bank a bank.
America's full-service banks, where you see this side.
Papa and I are in a bit of a spot. Fortunately, my flashlight's got new Kodak Super Life batteries with a real gold tip for the best contact. Yes, Papa clings to the old ways. He does not know that in flashlight tests, Super Life outlasted the copper top by up to 60 minutes. Really, Papa? Everyone knows you don't go for the copper, you go for the gold. See, Papa? Papa? Papa?
If you're taking more pills than you like for minor arthritis pain, try Aspercreme. Aspercreme concentrates hours of relief right where you hurt, penetrating, long-lasting relief. And there's no odor. Aspercreme, strong, effective relief without pills or odor.
This woman has an irritating rash that's inflamed and itchy. She's using maximum strength Cortisone 5 to go deep below the skin surface. Cortisone 5 gets under the itch for soothing relief and help in healing. Cortisone 5, itch relief and help in healing.
Only one man can generate this kind of excitement on the basketball court. He's Iowa State coach Johnny Orr, the driving force that has led his Raging Cyclone basketball teams into the ranks of national recognition. Now each week, Coach Orr will be reviewing last week's game, discussing strategy for upcoming opponents, and recognizing his players and coaches right in your living room. When you join host Mark Matthew and Coach Johnny Orr on The Johnny Orr Show.
You can join Johnny Saturday mornings at 11:30 on 5 TV.
I'd like to make one quick correction. I misspoke before when I said to former Secretary of State Al Haig that the IRA terrorist who was being sought by the British government had not been extradited. He was, I have learned, in fact, extradited last October for the murder of a British policeman. He had been held in this country previously, I think, for about a couple of years. Tomorrow, ABC News premieres a new program, The Health Show. Join Kathleen Sullivan at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 11:30 Central and Pacific, for the latest on health, fitness, nutrition, and medicine. Tomorrow, the chairman of the Food and Drug Administration discusses the latest developments in the search for a cure for AIDS. That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline, a presentation of ABC News.
I was vibrating with a strange, almost magnetic energy.
An adventure into the fantastic.
When are you going to tell me what's really going on?
A journey into the unusual.
Are these UFOs?
Dare to experience Shirley MacLaine's true story out on a limb.
This is your TV station.
Welcome to Solid Gold 87. Television's connoisseur of popular music. Starring Marilyn McCoo. And Solid Gold recording stars, Chicago. Elder Barnes. Eddie Rabbit. Cameo. A classic from the crazy world of Arthur Brown. The comedy of Arsenio Hall. Music reporter Nina Blackwood interviews Robert Palmer. Plus, the Solid Gold dancers all on Solid Gold 87.